They promised us it was compassion. They told us it was caused by global warming. But what if the chaos at our borders, the transformation of our cities, and the erosion of our national identity wasn't an accident at all? I'm Alan Paul Roberts, author of The Globalist Plan to Collapse Everything to Usher in a New World Order. And today, we're exposing the globalists' efforts to collapse the first pillar of society, national borders. Welcome to the Globalist Plan to Collapse Everything podcast, where we expose the globalists' sinister plans to collapse society so they can build a new world order upon the ashes. This is where we shine the light, expose the darkness, and push back against these evil tyrants. This isn't about conspiracy theories. This is where we analyze facts hiding in plain sight. Are you ready? Let's dive in. It feels like deja vu. Just like in 2020, Minneapolis is in chaos, ICE agents are being blocked from doing their jobs, and elected officials are openly defying federal immigration law. What we're witnessing isn't chaos, it's strategy. A year ago, the Trump administration achieved what many thought impossible. They stopped the flow of illegal migration across our southern border. Like in about a week, remember that? A total victory, right? Wrong. Why? Because the riots and well-funded protests in our cities and the inflammatory rhetoric from leaders like Mayor Fry and Governor Walz aren't random events. They're proof that the real immigration war never ended. It just changed battlefields. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on the first of 11 pillars of society that the globalists have targeted for collapse. National borders. And this isn't just America's fight. From Europe to Australia, the same pattern is playing out with eerie similarity. The question isn't whether our borders are under attack. The real question is who benefits if they fall? And why are the same tactics being deployed across many Western nations all at the same time? My book, The Globalist Plan to Collapse Everything to Usher in a New World Order, will serve as our roadmap. But fair warning, because once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. Let's rewind to October 2020. Remember the presidential debate? An important question was asked, and an answer was given that would reshape America. We didn't see it coming then, but wow, what a surprise. When asked about immigration, Joe Biden didn't hedge. He didn't dodge the question. He looked right into the camera and promised to open the floodgates. Don't take my word for it. Here's exactly what he said.
I would, in fact, make sure that we immediately surge to the border. All those people are seeking asylum. They deserve to be heard. That's who we are. We're a nation that says if you want to flee and you're fleeing oppression, you should come.
But here's what most people missed. Biden didn't just keep the promise, he exceeded it. What followed wasn't failed immigration policy, it was orchestrated mass migration on a scale we've never seen before. The administration didn't just accept some asylum seekers at the border, they actually created a sophisticated and costly infrastructure to facilitate mass entry. Here's what I'm talking about. Remember this? Midnight charter flights to interior cities, taxpayer-funded bus tickets to destinations of their choice, cell phones and free hotels, meals, and rechargeable debit cards on arrival. And here's the critical thing. No vetting to weed out criminals, gang members, foreign intelligence operatives, or political insurgents. It's almost like they wanted them too. Border Patrol records tell a staggering story, a story of people from 160 countries, not hundreds of thousands of people, we're talking millions. Estimates range from 10 to 25 million in just 4 years. Based on the undercounted government figures, the equivalent population of the city of Pittsburgh entered the U.S. every 6 weeks on average. Think about that. The equivalent of a major city every 6 weeks. The truth is, nobody knows the total number because when you deliberately make a border that porous, accurate counting becomes nearly impossible. And maybe that was the point all along. Now, here's where it gets darker, and most people don't know this. Central America's Darien Gap is one of the most treacherous jungle crossings in the world. And according to seasoned war correspondent Michael Yon, in 2023, it was the site of something truly extraordinary. UN-sponsored camps designed to accelerate the flow of migrants north toward the United States. And our nation helped fund them. Michael Yon didn't just report rumors. He was there on the ground taking photos and videos. And he claims to have witnessed something even more damning. Alejandro Mayorkas, Biden's own Secretary of Homeland Security, at one of these camps. Yon describes the camps and their purpose in this clip. Watch this.
Are they men, or what kind of people are they?
A lot of them are just military-age males.
What other nationalities are you seeing moving through this camp?
Well, from about 140 countries. Many of them are Cubans and Haitians, Venezuelans, huge numbers.
Who's paying for these buses?
United States and UN and many others, but the United States is the chief and principal benefactor of our own invasion. You see the right here, you'll see this everywhere. They are the ones invading Panama and everywhere. Like if you go to Amsterdam Airport in Netherlands, they've got their headquarters is in Switzerland, right? But if you go to the Terminal 3 of departures at Schiphol Airport in Amsterdam, you'll see they have a ticket office. And like, for instance, the Chinese that I spoke with today, they were talking about going leaving China and going through Amsterdam, and then they go to Ecuador, and then they come by bus to Darien Gap in Panama, they go through Colombia, and then they come to the Darien Gap here, and then they end up in this camp.
So I'm looking up that website, IOM, ONU Migración. It's called UN Migration. And
that's right.
Yeah, UN Migration. So this is a United Nations program to use assets of Europe and the world to push migrants into countries that they want to occupy. That's what it looks like.
Yeah. And look at this space they've cleared to increase the size of this camp.
Let that sink in. This wasn't bureaucratic incompetence. This was a plan. This was infrastructure, coordination between the U.S. government, the UN, and Central American nations to pipeline millions of migrants northward. And here's what confirms that this wasn't just about America. While the current administration has largely closed our southern border, the exact same playbook is running in real time across Western Europe, Australia, and New Zealand today. Millions are still arriving annually. The same tactics, the same purpose, the same chaos. The effects are identical wherever the globalist plan is implemented. Number one, crime surges and governments downplay it, ignore it, or refuse to track it. Schools and hospitals and social services are pushed past capacity. A housing crisis occurs as affordable units vanish from the market, taken by the incoming illegals. And perhaps most critically, the systematic erosion of national identity. This isn't parallel evolution. This is a coordinated globalist policy from the top down. Which brings us to today's guest. Catherine Edwards is a voice of clarity in the midst of the UK's immigration storm. Catherine hosts the Live, Love, Learn podcast and the Catherine Edwards podcast, where she cuts through official narratives to explore what's really happening on the ground. She interviews thinkers and practitioners worldwide on health, freedom, consciousness, and the hidden forces reshaping our societies. Today, she's going to walk us through the migrant invasion transforming the UK, the growing resistance most media won't cover, and where this is all heading. Because if you want to understand where America was and where it could be again, you need to see what's happening in Britain right now. Links to Catherine's work are in the show notes. So let's dive in. Hello, Catherine, and welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much, Alan. It's such a pleasure to be here, and this is going to be an interesting conversation today.
I have no doubt. All right, well, let's start with the present day. What does the migration situation in the UK look like right now in February 2026? Give our American audience a sense of the scale and scope of what you're seeing on the ground.
It's very, very interesting. And I will caveat sort of any figures that I give today. Obviously, I'm taking from public sources, Alan. And
Sure.
I think the main thing is that most people have completely lost trust in any of the figures that are being reported, because a lot of the times what people are experiencing in real life and what's being reported, there's a huge disparity. And that works both ways, as I think we'll see in the conversation today. But in terms of what's happening at the moment, the immigration figures are way down over the last year. But this has been a problem that has been going on really since the awful Tony Blair, who's as globalist as they come, was our prime minister from 1997 to 2007. And in 2004, he actually really opened up the borders with so-called sort of legal immigration, in terms of he let a whole new load of countries that had joined the EU come with no checks straight into the UK, whereas other countries actually put delays and controls in place. And very interestingly, Alan, a whistleblower subsequently came out and said that he was in meetings where Tony Blair had allegedly, as we have to say in inverted commas, had basically said that this was all a plan to transform the nature and culture of British society to a point where it's irreversible. Now, this was back in 2004, and we can see that playing out today. And in terms of what most people in the UK are seeing, it's very interesting. For such a small nation, there's a huge disparity based on where you live. So, for example, someone like myself, I live in a little village in the middle of the countryside, and I don't see any of this on a day-to-day basis. But people who are living in the coastal areas and the areas where the migrant hotels have been put, for example, are seeing a terrible, catastrophic, their societies are gone. You know, Ireland is particularly badly affected. So I think the problem is very real. The numbers that have come in over since basically the early 2000s are absolutely huge. I think what people are seeing is their whole societies and a lot of areas of the UK have been completely transformed, because a lot of the migrants are sort of taken over certain areas of the UK. So you've got some areas that have been hugely impacted and other areas that are so far pretty much untouched for
That's
now.
interesting. Yeah, that's interesting. That reminds me of our blue cities. For most of us, that's where a lot of it is concentrated. We call them blue cities. They're just, left-leaning Democrat run cities, and that's where most of it's happening. Like, New York City and larger cities, Minneapolis, Minnesota is in the news constantly here. But that's where it seems to be focused. If you live outside of the city, you don't really see it too much. But in the city, for some, it's been almost unbearable. And we've seen the crime going up. Now, in our case, that is being reversed. I mean, we just had a report that came out, saying that crime's at its lowest level in 125 years because they have exported so many criminals, actually, which is very interesting. Well, earlier in the show, I documented how the Biden administration actually created like an infrastructure, UN camps, charter flights into the country, taxpayer-funded support, all this to facilitate mass migration into the U.S. Are you seeing a similar level of coordination and infrastructure to bring the migrants in the UK?
I think our situation's very, very different. I mean, being an island and a small one at that, what has got all the attention is the small boats coming over from France. And
Sure.
it's absolutely ludicrous I think every member of the general public almost unanimously realizes that if the government were actually serious about stopping this, it could be done easily. We've got a navy, we've got
Yeah,
a small island to protect. It's
sure.
not that hard to realise that we could stop this happening. There's been loads of information on a huge disparity between what we see, like everyone, the mainstream news, on what we see in the alternative news. And there's a lot of videos going round where basically border officials are basically accepting the small migrant boats coming across the channel, checking them over and sending the boats back to get the next lot, which of course causes a huge uproar and shows that it's not just the illegal gangs that are bringing these people over. It's a coordinated effort of which our authorities are part and parcel of. But I would caveat with the fact that there's been so much misinformation in the media. So it's absolutely happening. And even though the small boats coming over are supposedly a small number of the total population that are flooding into the UK, of course, those are the ones that get most the attention because they're the ones which will really raise the anger levels and the frustration levels for
That's right.
people in here. And if you can keep people in that vibration state and focused on that, they take their mind off what's happening elsewhere and where people are being bought into from other routes. So it's absolutely coordinated, but it's pretty obvious, I think, to a lot of us that the reporting of it is also deliberately inflammatory to
Yes.
raise a lot of attention on it and to get people focusing on what's happening here, which of course always raises the question of what are they diverting our attention away from?
Yeah, we had a similar situation as far as diverting attention. You know, our southern border was wide open
Yeah.
in the Biden years, and millions were coming through. Nobody knows for sure. 10 to 20 million is kind of the estimate. Some people say 25 million. But what got very little attention were the nighttime flights coming in from other countries, landing at our airports, and people being bussed out to different places. That was going on too. But that was hardly spoken of. And you know, I don't know for sure what the statistics are, but I'm told there's a big immigration problem at our northern border with Canada that they're
Right.
bringing even today with Trump under the Trump administration that supposedly there's people getting in that way. So it is kind of a shell game of multiple things happening. In your case, do you have any statistics on how many, I'll call them illegal migrants, migrants that didn't come through the proper methods. Like what's that look like over the past couple years? Any statistics?
Yeah, I pulled out some figures which I'll read off you, but again, this is from the Office of National Statistics, and there's
Sure.
a lot of debate as to how accurate they are. And of course, the illegal ones are very much the ones they've caught, which is half the issue.
Yeah,
Uh,
okay.
so basically, at the moment, we've had a massive decrease in terms of the long-term immigration has been net migration in for the year ending to June 2005 was 204,000, which is a significant, it's actually the lowest for quite a few years. And in terms of actually the figures that I pulled out in terms of the small boats, the headlines that we get, 2002, pretty up and down, 2022, nearly 46,000, 2023, 30,000, 2024, 36,000.
Okay.
But these, of course, are the ones that have been caught and actually reported on. But what is pretty clear to a lot of people that have been really looking into this, I mean, do you talk at all about the Toronto protocols at all and the Richard Day tapes in your
Not
research?
really. No, I haven't heard much about that at all. Explain
Well,
to us what that is.
I think really the Toronto Protocols, quite in depth. People, I'd really encourage people to look these up. You can find them on the internet by Serge Monask. And he published these Toronto Protocols, which were largely, of course, put down as conspiracy in 1995. And it's basically an instruction manual for dismantling the West. And the collapse of everything that you talk about in your brilliant book is really spoken about in the Toronto Protocols and also the Richard Day tapes, which are meant to have come, again, put under the category of conspiracy if you look them up, but from meetings and a talk by Richard Day in 1969. And there's a huge amount of overlap between what's covered in the Toronto Protocols and the Richard Day tapes. Now, people might say they're conspiracy, probably not your audience, and they might be. We don't have definitive proof of all of these.
Sure.
But when you see the situation playing out exactly as written back in 1969, back in 1995, then you've got to, it suggests that there's some truth to them. And I think in terms of the collapsing the borders, it's absolutely crucial to the overall plan of the problem, reaction, solution that David Icke talks about so much. Because if you can collapse the borders and completely change the identity of nation states, then people are almost crying out for the rescue solution, which is let's put all the controls in place, the digital ID, the
Sure.
surveillance cameras. Basically, 1984 comes alive and well. And
Sure,
this
to
is
fix a
what,
problem they created.
yeah, to
Yeah.
face it, and it fits so perfectly what we're saying. But what I am encouraged about, Alan, is that probably last year was probably our worst ever in the UK for the publicity around the immigration and the fact that a lot of local groups, primarily women-led, actually middle-aged women like myself, there's a very famous group called the Pink Ladies, and they were mothers that basically decided to peacefully protest. And of course, they were labelled far right and racist
Sure.
by the mainstream media, but very peaceful protests, because where the migrant hotels, which of course are virtually all young fighting age men, very little families, virtually no women and children, it was a real risk. And we have had an increase in sexual attacks and violence. And we can't prove those figures are due to this, but certainly the perception of the population, real or imagined, and I'll explain a bit more about that at the moment, is that this is a major, major risk. And, if you've got school-age children and you've got a great big migrant hotel full of single men from another country that are all pent up together, it doesn't take a genius to realise that you're sitting on a bit of an exploding time bomb and that people would rightly be very concerned, taking into account also the cultural differences that you've got that play into that, and the way that, a lot of the immigrants view Western women.
Sure.
But one of the things I think has become quite obvious to me, certainly more so over the last 6 months, is how the reporting has been, because the crime figures don't match with how people are feeling and what they're seeing in real life. So either the crime figures are wrong, or the media have beautifully manipulated people to make them feel that the situation, whether they're false flags or some very highly publicised real events, to make them feel more and more unsafe, more and more that their whole culture and way of living in the UK has disappeared, which again, the hope from the government was that we'd all then accept the increased surveillance that they're rolling out as we speak.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's so similar to what was happening here, and to some degree what is happening here in America, depending on which cities you look at. So just really quickly, say the UK population maybe 10 years ago, 5 years ago, whatever time frame you're familiar with, in terms of the number of we'll call them traditional UK residents versus migrants who have come in for whatever reason.
Yeah.
How is your population changing? And can you give us a sense of that? Because the UK, when I remember the days, I think the UK was around 80 million. I don't know what your population is today, but I'm curious as to what the mix is these days of native born versus foreign born, or anything you might have, even if it's just your sense of it. You don't have to give me census figures, but just wondering how that is changing, to what degree.
I don't have the official figures, and again, I'm not sure they're even reported, to be honest, because what would you actually say? I mean, I was just looking up briefly here, they're now saying that around 19 to 20% of the population of England and Wales are non-UK born. So that is a huge increase over the last sort of 10 years. And I think what we're seeing in real life, again, I would say it's higher than that. And
Yeah.
I think even we're seeing now spreading out into rural communities, traditionally, um, the non-native UK people were very much obviously centred around the large cities because
Sure.
that's where most of the work is. But now we're seeing that spreading out everywhere. And one of the main problems is you're not allowed to speak about it because you're seen as racist, which is absolutely ridiculous. But certainly, I don't think there's a single person in this country that wouldn't say the demographics have changed hugely over the last 10 years, particularly over the last 5 years.
Okay.
I think working styles and the ways of living have probably accentuated that a little bit more because even in terms of the jobs that are available now, but there's a difference, a real difference in the feel and also the culture and very much what we are and aren't allowed to speak about. So we're not allowed to speak about a lot of the issues openly. Back when I was a child, we had virtually nothing was censored, and even our
Right.
comedy, our TV shows, we could openly jest and talk about these issues. Nowadays, particularly the youngsters in school, they can't mention anything about this. If so, they're called racist, they're called bigots, and therefore we can't even have the conversations openly from
Oh.
both sides of the argument that means that we can move forward together and make the communities work again. And that, for me, is one of the major successes that
Yeah.
the politicians have had in making all these subjects taboo. And if you can't talk about them, you can't come up with resolutions.
Yeah, no, I agree. And, it was heading that way in the US. And, I gotta give, President Trump credit for this. He's the one who started pushing back against all forms of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And, the DEI, let's say, philosophy also had a huge censorship aspect to it and what you could and couldn't say. But basically, he got rid of DEI within the federal government, all the hiring standards that were based on DEI and race and everything like that. Got rid of it in the military, all the DEI, political correctness in the military, got rid of that. And that attitude, I think because he was so loud about it, it started spreading to the rest of American society where, a lot of DEI hires started getting fired. Not the hires, but like the HR departments, the human resource departments, those positions went that were DEI based. And now it's getting to the point where the comedians are becoming funny again. They're freer. So it
Right.
has been a cultural shift, but it kind of came from the top. But, it just seems like has to get to the place for one reason or another where people have said, we've had enough, and they no longer cooperate with that pressure to be censored. But then again, when it's the school children, they don't really have a choice. They're managed, by their teachers, and you got to feel sorry for them for what they're going through. Some of them.
Yes and no. I mean, I do sort of agree with that, but I mean, I would also push back a little bit about what perhaps Donald Trump has or hasn't done. And obviously, you're living
Mhm.
there, so you know better from me. But our perception from over in the UK is almost there's something about the human psyche where we're very much programmed to say A or B,
Sure.
Republican or Democrat.
Yeah.
And absolutely, Trump has got rid of a lot of that in speech. But when we're looking from the outside and seeing obviously what's reported to us of what's happening with ICE, I mean, absolutely looks horrific. And again, this mentality, not just in the USA, but in other places as well, where if it's the person that you agree with that's doing some of these actions, it's all
Yeah.
okay. But if the other side were doing it, it's absolutely horrendous. And I think one of the
Sure.
problems that I see in both our countries and very much here in the UK is look, if any system of governance can put these things in place, so fair enough, Trump's in power now and he's rolling back a lot of this. But what happens when the administration changes again?
Oh yeah.
system is set up that they can swing it back, pendulum backward forwards. And I think in both our countries, this is what we've seen. It's almost good cop, bad cop. And the whole point is, meanwhile, as the mass populations are focused on what the particular leader is doing, rather than the fact that the overall direction is pretty disastrous.
Yeah, yeah, it is. Yeah, there have been a couple isolated incidents that have been horrific with what's happened. I'm honestly surprised it hasn't happened more because there's
Mm.
so much pushback and you have the mayors and other people actually encouraging this, but we're sort of starting to overlap into the next pillar that we'll be talking about next time, which is security and police protection. But anyway, on immigration,
Mhm.
getting back to that specifically, what is the level of pushback in the UK? Because occasionally I'll see, that there was a big mass gathering and people really started speaking out. I've heard that Keir Starmer backed down from some of his policies relating to, privacy actually. But I guess it sounds to me like there's a pretty significant resistance, but it's hard to get a clear picture of that, at least from here in the US where it's not on the news much.
Yeah, it's very, very hard for even people in the UK to get. There is a significant resistance, and I think it is not necessarily nationally coordinated. It's very much coordinated in the areas that are hit most. But there's been a huge, huge pushback, and I'm pretty sure that is they're rethinking their strategy now, thinking this hasn't gone as past. And of course, the immigration, if we're brought into the problem reaction solution of flood the borders, get rid of the pride in your culture. If you
Yes.
crush down the borders and there's no identity anymore, then what are people fighting for? And I think people have actually, I think it's backfired on them, and I think it's actually brought out a huge amount of national pride. I mean, we had the ridiculous situation in America. My understanding is you're very proud to fly your flag. We don't do that much in the UK, apart from
Yeah.
perhaps at sports matches. But last year and the year before, there was a huge outcry of people putting up the Union Jacks everywhere,
Yeah.
and the councils were having to go down and pull them all down. And on the mainstream media, there was ridiculous people saying this is absolutely disgusting, it's racist. But people
Racist to fly your own flag.
racist to fly your own flag. But the
Oh,
great thing
goodness.
that was so encouraging, Alan, is this was across the country, and people said, no, enough. We're not falling for this rubbish anymore. So there is a huge, huge resistance, just like when we had the COVID stuff, just when we had the protest about the digital ID,
Yeah.
which Keir Starmer has won back, but none of us are thinking we're in the safe yet. We're just thinking they're having to rethink how they roll it out via stealth, because people are saying absolutely no, enough is enough, and they are standing together as communities, and it is making almost the pride of being British come back again. And I think that's sometimes out of these disastrous moves, we get some good things come out of it. So there's a
Yeah.
lot more pushback than what you're being shown. And even in the UK, we're not shown, because if they can make us think that the people pushing back are in a minority, buys them some time. But that's not the case at all.
Yeah, I'm really glad to hear that. That's very encouraging. It is. I've known a lot of different people from Europe, and a lot of them comment on what you said, that Americans seem to have a pride in being American. A lot
Yeah.
of people fly flags, and I've thought a lot about that, and I think it's a cultural thing that is kind of embedded into the psyche, or has been over the years, much less so now. I mean, a lot of forces trying to push back and make us ashamed to be American. But I think overall, I guess you would say that Americans over the years have um, been made to be very aware of the freedoms they have and the value of those freedoms. And so when we sense that that is being challenged, it, like you, it starts coming out even more if people resist. But I'm so glad to hear that's happening in the UK, because I think that's vital to maintaining your national identity. and not just being rolled over by the people who want to take it all from you by diluting your society and, you know, taking away the things that you've always stood for, that the common person has stood for. Um, so, yeah, that's great to hear that you have some significant pushback, it sounds like.
It really is, and I think we do it in a different way in the UK. We really do it in a different way, a little bit quieter about it, but actually with a huge strength. And I think a lot of people are very hard. We're also very proud that we do, in general, genuinely accept. If we've got someone who is absolutely an asylum seeker and needs to come in, people in the UK will generally open them with welcoming arms.
Sure.
Absolutely. We are very multicultural, but we can, every single person now virtually, from all walks of life, we're not as stupid as we're made out to be. We can see the difference between general asylum seekers
Yeah.
and a coordinated effort to flood the country, to get rid of our national identity. And however, even the people that are not into the conspiracies at all can see that there's something inherently very wrong. It doesn't work. All our systems, our schooling systems, our policing systems, as we'll talk about in another episode, our medical, our national health system, we can see that they're all collapsing under the strain. And equally, people aren't silly. Again, we've got homeless problems just like every country has.
Sure.
We've got a lot of, people who can't afford housing. The cost of living in the UK is extremely high. And suddenly they can give all the migrants, hotel place, cleaners, mobile phones, driving lessons, and yet they're not doing that for any of their own citizens. It's deliberately throwing a fire on the flame to just cause division. And of course, a divided society is easy to control. But people who aren't looking into the Richard Day tapes, aren't looking into the Toronto hotels, haven't been following day for night, they can see it happening. They can see that we're being deliberately divided. And they are absolutely standing up. And I think the evil controllers have got a real battle on their hands. They've pushed it too far. They've made it too obvious. People are not falling for it now. And I think that there's going to be even more people standing up moving forward.
So I know you interview people probably from different countries too, and I just wonder if we get beyond the UK. So I think we've established that there's a very strong parallel between many of the things that have happened in the US and are happening in the UK as well. But what about if we go broader? Pick whatever country you want, countries in Europe or maybe Australia, New Zealand. Just what you're familiar with in terms of actually speaking to people or even just watching the news. To what degree are you seeing similar things happen in other countries?
It's very interesting because I've got a lot of friends in Canada, America, and Australia. That's
Okay.
where my sort of biggest groups are that I would talk about these things. And I think in Australia, I'm getting reported back. There's a lot less pushback than what we're seeing in the UK. That seems
Okay.
to be the perception for the people living there. And then you take on the other side of things, for example, France and the French. I love the French. The French don't stand for much nonsense and they
Yeah.
don't take a lot of instructions from
Yeah.
authority. And a lot of the protests in France are absolutely huge, whether it's from the farmers or from the immigration. And they are standing up in their hundreds of thousands. And again, it's not being reported. The downside is there are certainly seem to be real no-go areas in France. That seems
Yes.
to be further along problem-wise than it is in the UK
Hmm.
from our perception and what I'm being told from people I know who live there. So it's I think the problem is everywhere. People are standing up in their own cultural ways and
Yeah.
doing it differently to our same sort of overall. We all see we're being, herded in the same direction, but the way they're doing it in our different countries varies. But I think from my point of view, the ones I'm not hearing a lot of stand up from, just from the friends I'm speaking to, are Canada and Australia.
Yeah.
They seem to be the ones that do not seem to be pushing back in as much numbers as we're seeing throughout Europe and certainly in the UK.
So do you think the policies that are being implemented, just the flood of refugees, the giving them special privileges in terms of housing or food, shelter, cell phones, things like that. Do you hear those same policies being implemented in other countries, like very similar policies, like in Australia or Canada or elsewhere in Europe, as to what we've talked about?
Interestingly, I don't, and possibly I haven't asked the right questions, Alan, but I think the UK are pretty well known as being a soft touch as a welfare state.
Hmm.
And
Okay.
when you see the interviews, even on the alternative media for migrants that will be interviewed, that's why they aim for the UK, because they know we're soft touch and they're going to get the most. So possibly, we've got ourselves to blame for that. We've been
Mhm.
too lenient. But again, I think that is definitely changing because people are not standing for it anymore. Now, it's very difficult to, even when we're in here, of course, because we're such a small country, you can't hide from it so much. You've got something like Australia, huge country with a very small population.
Right.
So it's probably more difficult for people in different areas of the country to see what's going on. The UK is so tiny with such a huge population, it's a little bit more difficult to hide it. It is in plain sight a little bit more. But I think, again, we've probably made a rod for our own back in the UK. We are known as the welfare state, and therefore people have heard about that far and wide, and they're
Yeah.
very much coming to take advantage of it. And it is pretty awful because the cost of living, as I'm sure is happening in most of the countries of people that are watching this for, has absolutely escalated.
Yes.
So far more people are living below the poverty line in the UK than ever have before. And so when they see all our sort of hard-earned taxes going off to either Ukraine or housing and
Yeah.
giving all these benefits to people that have literally done nothing, people are not happy and are starting to really cause a fuss.
Yeah.
And
I've seen news reports. I mean, I have to really look for them on alternative media, but um, I saw that Australia was a country of 20 million and they took in 8 million people. So they're at like 28 million. And I've heard that housing is becoming not only unaffordable, but unavailable
yeah.
because they're prioritizing housing for the migrants and it's causing a real problem. But, it seems like not much news gets out on Australia. That's why I was kind of curious if you're hearing anything. Maybe
So
if you do, talk to some of your friends there, ask them that because I would love in a future conversation, to really know more about what's really going on the ground in Australia.
that's a very good point, and I will ask them. And I think that the main conversations I've had with my Australian friends, which are quite a few, is very, very concerned on the security side of things and the safety and the
Okay.
increased knife crime, etc. So that's really been the focus of the attention. But certainly housing is a real issue, and of course they've also had so much weather manipulation, sort of trying
Oh,
to wipe out a lot of the rural communities.
mm,
Um, we've also, leading into the problem reaction solution of the immigration and the open borders, is we've had announcements just in the last week in the UK that they are pushing ahead with the 15-minute city in Oxford. Now,
oh,
last time they did that, we had a fantastic group of, not that obviously I would ever condone anyone breaking the law, crossing my fingers as I said that,
I'm sure you
but
wouldn't.
we had a fantastic load of people, I can't remember what they were called, that as soon as they put the surveillance cameras in for the 15-minute city, miraculously they got cut down overnight, and that was pretty amazing how they did that. But they are now, the attention seems to have gone off completely from the news, from the immigration, onto the 15-minute cities and rolling out huge time the facial recognition cameras. So that is the push now. So we see a very clear strategy, Alan, in the news to divert people's attention. Last year was all about, and the year before, all about the immigration. Then the end of last year was all about the digital ID.
Yes.
And now we've shifted into the facial recognition in the 15-minute cities. Again, all very clearly outlined in the Toronto Protocols and the Richard Dave-Hapes and numerous others where we're looking at the Globalist Plan and Agenda 2030.
Interesting. Well, I know you don't have a crystal ball or a looking glass, but where do you, and maybe there's two futures, but where do you see things going for the UK in the next 2 to 5 years? On these, it seems like there's two paths that could go on depending on the resistance. I mean, what do you think is a good scenario versus a bad scenario? Where do you think this could go?
You've caught me on a good day, so I'm going to start with the positive.
Okay.
Look, us Brits, despite what people think, we are incredibly resilient. And, we dig deep. There's been a huge concerted effort, like they have in all our countries, to weaken our resilience through taking our health down, through the poisoning in our air, food, water, etc., and the ridiculous mental health issues that they're pushing on everyone, and the programming to make us not feel that we can't talk out about these issues. But I think the British spirit is still running strong, and I think they will not stand for it. I think that we are in a very good position now. We only have to look at over 3 million people actually signed the petition against digital ID. Now, that might not be a high percentage, but it's one of the highest ever and the quickest that of almost any petition. So I'm hopeful, but with a big caveat that there's something about human nature, whether it's a health crisis, a divorce, losing your job. There's something about human nature where quite often things have to get really bad for the individual before they take action.
Yes.
I think this year and next year is the year it gets really bad. People are struggling to buy real food. They're struggling with the cost of living. And I think it's hitting people now. And by the end of the year, it will even more. So I think we've got a bit of a decline first before we literally rise up in our masses, peacefully, of course, and just say, no, we're not washing it. I mean, our government is the most unpopular ever. But the caveat is that there's no one else in our current political system that's going to come in that we can trust at all. So I am hopeful, but I think we're in for a very rough couple of years. I think we're going to sink a lot lower before we start to climb out of it, is my honest opinion.
Yeah, I agree. It feels to me like the entire Western world, even the US, is very, I don't know if unstable is the word, but volatile is probably
Yeah.
it. Things are very volatile. You feel like they could change quickly in one direction or another. And but I'm encouraged to hear what you're saying about the spirit of the British people, and we're cheering for you here in the U.S. as well on that, and so we're kind of all in this together. That's the reality. I mean, this really is a globalist effort, I believe, to take down the world, and it's country by country, very similar things happening in different countries, almost like different verses of the same song, but they're pretty much all singing the same tune. And that's why we have to stand together and we have to shine the light on what's going on, which is why I'm so glad you were able to be with us today so that we can get some sense of what's happening in the UK. And also, encourage each other, pray for each other, be there for each other, speak out, spread the message so that we all understand what's going on and we can pull together. Well, Catherine, thanks so much for being on the show with us. Tell our audience where people can find your podcast and your social media and anything else you want to tell them about.
Thank you so much, Alan. And just very quickly before I do that, I think what you just said then was the crux of it all. When you're deep in the situation, you have your blinkers on. We can help each other so much
Yeah.
by seeing across the pond. You can see different things that we won't see because we're too embedded in it, and vice versa. So this is a global problem. We can all help each other. We need to help each other because it's the only way out. So thank you so much for doing that. And of course, prayer is an exceptionally important part of that. So you can find me on YouTube still. At the moment, I'm
Okay.
very shadow banned under Catherine Edwards. My podcast is a Live, Love, Learn podcast, and I'm also on Instagram, Rumble, and Substack. You can search for my name on there. Please do come and join me and join in the conversations.
Well, that's great. And by the way, everyone, Catherine has agreed to join us next week to discuss the globalist plan to collapse the second pillar of society, which is security and police protection. So be sure to look for that at rumble.com/the globalist plan. Thanks again, Catherine. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
And just a reminder, everyone, to check out my podcasts at rumble.com/the globalist plan, and to head over to globalcollapsebook.com, where you can see lots of interviews and order a signed copy of my book, The Globalist Plan to Collapse Everything, to usher in a new world order. That's it for today.